pentagram dedicated to Henry Foreman. In the years of the primal force and the dawn of terrestrial birth, man mastered the mammoth and horde.
Searching for the darkness, searching for the light. Searching in the darkness, putting up a fight. Iron chains surround you. You try to make a run. Someone near has found you, and now you see the sun. Yes, indeed, some lyrics from Razor, Executioner, song right there. An odd combination of words. Searching in the darkness, and then in the second line, you're also looking in the darkness. I suppose that's fair enough, really. You're, searching for the light, that kind of thing. Iron chains surround you. It doesn't quite specify whether you're wrapped up in those chains or maybe you're maybe you're at the dock somewhere where there ships come into harbour, that kind of thing. You could be, maybe you're in a chain factory, I'm not sure. Try to make a run. Someone near has found you, and now you see the sun. Well, I mean, what better source of light than the sun, my friends? Welcome to Agitators Anonymous, episode 120. 120. God damn it, Janet. Well, I'm Alan Averill, your hostess with the leastest. And I thank you all. Recently, I've seen, again, another upturn, a little upsurge, for whatever that's worth, in the people listening, the numbers of people listening. And the interview with Okai from Bolzer went down a treat. And I do want to get back into some more video interviews, some more discussions with people. And over the next few weeks, I'm going to be in a few different places, namely Beyond the Gates now, this coming week ahead, so hopefully I can nab a few interesting people and try and have a chat with them. Let's hope so. Well, let's get some of those pesky informationals out of the way first. You can follow me on Instagram, _primordial, primordial_official. You can support the show over at patreon.com/Alan Averill for as little as whatever it is per month. Who knows? One of your Earth Euro, a bag of turnips. I'm not really too sure exactly how the tiers work, and never amended or fixed them. Well, isn't that just my way? A typical Irish crash bang wallop by the seat of your pants kind of way to do things. As anyone who saw the Dread Sovereign show in Headbangers Open Air last Friday will clearly understand what I mean. Crazy, chaotic kind of show, but certainly a lot of fun and a lot of rock and roll was had. Anyway, so the show is sponsored by metalblade.com in North America. That is, also includes the Canada, where upon those amazing Razor lyrics were taken from somewhere, sometime in the past. They were pen to paper somewhere in a small town in Canada. It's probably Montreal, probably Toronto, who knows. Anyway, besides the point. You could be in Canada right now and you could be thinking, God damn it, I need that vinyl reissue to Butcher to Birth. Yeah, you probably do. So go and take a look. Metalblade.com, use the promo code ALAN and you will get 10% off your order. And also Hate Couture. Hateful yet tasteful apparel and clothing. Of course, you want a shirt that venerates a tyrant from history. You want something to piss off your nearest and dearest. You want something, and also piss off the people you dislike. Go over there, www.hate, as in I hate you, couture, COUTURE.com, 616 / You can find the links to both of those underneath this in the description. Underneath this podcast in the description. There'll be a few other things I'm going to mention later on, etc., etc. But let's get into it. If you're thinking to yourself, I could advertise my band, my label, my tattoo shop, my whatever else, my coltan mining plant in the Upper Volta, then get in touch and we can work out a deal. I have a captive audience. It is not clear whether they are surrounded by chains or actually in chains, and those are metaphorical, of course, metaphorical chains, surrounded by or beside. Either way, they are relatively captive, it would appear, judging by the statistics, unless there is a Chinese bot farm listening over and over again, filling me with false hope, just like they're doing to the West. Boom! Take that. Right, so episode 120. So what I'm going to talk today about is internal prejudices within music, etc. A little bit about Morrissey. And and I'll explain that in the fullness of time. I know there's been other things happening in the world. There's been politics. There's been so many things that I could really talk about. Sometimes you just get the feeling that the world is just one big pantomime. We're invited to, I guess you've seen all the pictures of Zelensky's wedding in Vogue, and apparently his meet and greets with lots of people from Hollywood. And you get the impression that maybe they're just going to step off the stage of that proxy war and start up a podcast. Hey, why not? Or start up a Netflix series, The Zelenskys. I don't know. It sort of breaks my brain. The whole thing just seems like incredible pantomime. But there you go. According to my computer here, it's 20 degrees here in Dublin, and it follows with a chance of raining in 28 minutes. Goddamn, didn't that heat wave kill thousands like we were threatened, like we were told it would? Now, of course, that could get me into some trouble with some people because questioning the orthodoxy of that argument, well, listen, we've been through that on the podcast. So what am I going to talk about? Well, let's get into it. I'm going to talk about biases. I'm going to talk about prejudices, about, some relatively cute stories about growing up and having your internal bias machine challenged as a kid, and things that we may not have been into at one stage that we grow into, that we find out that we love, and what an incredible feeling that is. But also I'm going to take a little bit of a look at how people who once upon a time, I suppose, would have been celebrated for standing up against the system now somehow seem to be the system. And that if you stand up against the system, stand up against the man. Well, seems like a majority of the public, the Twitterati, are not very happy with you standing up against the man. Anyway, I thought what I'd do is I talk about my own, as I said, internal prejudices in music. Things that I once thought I hated and now love, and that incredible feeling of discovering an artist you'd ignored and then have a whole discography to unearth. That, and I'm going to talk about Morrissey as well. But let's do the musical stuff first. First example, Sparks. I wrote this a little while ago, or at least I wrote some notes about this a little while ago, because I remember sitting with my cousin, not the one I do April Man with, but my other cousin, somewhere in 1987 or so, playing our homemade version of Dungeons and Dragons, listening to Manowar, fighting the world. We drew huge, sprawling cities, rooms and dungeons and ramparts and all sorts of things. We had dice, and someone was the dungeon master, but we had no book and just kind of made it up as we went along. Proper Stranger Things style. Which is why that show initially registered so strongly with me, as all the aesthetic references pretty much were me in 1983. But then, look, it became too cutesy, and I went back to playing my Infernal War vinyls, or whatever I was doing on that day. But anyway, me and said cousin are arguing. He tells me, well, we're arguing via the WhatsApp, but we're arguing. He tells me, watch that Sparks documentary on Netflix. It was current 2 months ago when I had the thought about this. But you don't get round to doing every podcast that fits into every thought you have. But this one just sort of dredged itself up in my memory. But like everyone lately, I've been wondering about the wisdom of my subscription. But it's still hanging around my credit card balance like a bit of a bad smell, to be honest with you. But it would seem that maybe even Netflix are getting the message that if you go woke, you go broke. Apparently, that's what they say. Anyway. Now, anyone who knows me or has heard me ramble on throughout the podcast knows my thoughts on what I consider funny or comedy or, let's say, quirky music. I have 0% time for it, and unapologetically so. Not even for a moment. Last night I was watching a great YouTube series. It's called New British Canon, and it takes on different songs, different bands, all this kind of stuff. And it had the song, it had an episode about the Fountains of Wayne, who were taking lots of inspiration from the Cars. And it got me down this rabbit hole of watching all of the stuff about power pop. And it just kind of was very interesting watching it, but it just sort of washed over me with how intentionally kind of cute and sort of quirky this kind of music was by invention. And as I said, it kind of got my hackles up because I just don't get Cheap Trick. Like I said, I rather the visceral gloom and darkness of Black Sabbath over it any time. But this YouTube series is really excellent. I would really recommend it. They talk about Susie and the Banshees and Kate Bush and all sorts of very interesting stuff. There's one great one about how Ace of Spades brought together metal and punk and all this kind of stuff. But to be honest, I'm very, very content to spear anyone's party balloons of daft joy, any quirkiness, any oddness, any ooh-wee-oo, just like Buddy Holly, makes me, as I said, want to listen to Scream Bloody Gore or Autopsy Mental Funeral. I don't need Frank Zappa in my life. I don't need to hear Clutch's inane lyrics about beards, the Melvins, whatever. If your personality is a haircut, whatever. Take your dumb song titles and get out of my town. I know, the riff. I get it. The Melvins are kind of sacred. And I have riffs in my record collection, etc. And every now and again an argument gets to me, or a riff gets to me, or a song gets to me, and I go, yeah, maybe I was a bit of a douche, a bit of a dickhead. I'll walk that one back. And yes, indeed, Melvins could be one of those bands, a band I had a visceral dislike for, purely based on their image, because all I wanted to hear at the time was Morbid Angel. But I've always been quite reasonably happy to be close-minded. In fact, in truth, sometimes, and it depends on my audience and how much I want to annoy them, I can celebrate it. Anything that remotely feels like there's an in-joke, or as I said, quirky music, fuck it. I'm not interested remotely. Well, maybe so. I'll explain. This is how I divide it. AC/DC, for example. AC/DC. Is it fun? In a way, yeah, it is, but it has energy, it's uplifting. Sure, but it's rock and roll. Is Motorhead joyous? Of course, in its own way, it's life-affirming. But it's got that rebellious streak. And then, for example, with the power pop stuff I was listening to last night, and this happened to be about Fountain of Wayne, or let's say Cheap Trick, it's so knowingly clever that it sort of makes me vaguely infuriate at it. It's, it's about the right songwriting motifs. It's lacking in a sort of visceral energy that sort of resonates with me. So I find it a little bit grating. But fun and funny are two quite different things, Of course, Little Richard or Chuck Berry makes me happy after a few drinks. And on one tour, one night, we had a Little Richard evening. But you could never call it funny. Fun and funny are two different things. But you could never say Chuck Berry is quirky, for example, of course. Now, look, I know there are probably some of you listening to this who like Clutch. And Clutch have some great riffs and they're a great live band. I get it. And I'm being unfair, kind of on purpose to prove, to prove a point or just to be vaguely irritating today. But the thing about it is, there's a part of me that knows Clutch guy. Everyone knows a Clutch guy. A kind of guy who eschews or kind of is not interested in rock and roll that has the tappings of rock and roll. He wants everyman rock and roll. But kind of would consider even AC/DC a bit too extravagant. And because Clutch seem to have songs about beards and down-to-earth stuff and this kind of stuff, Clutch guy who always is wearing, camo pants shorts in winter, always has his cap a little bit on the portly side. He's got the neck beard. He's rocking the neck beard, etc., etc. I always end up in a bit of a confrontation with Clutch guy because Clutch guy doesn't like Judas Priest. Clutch guy doesn't like Iron Maiden. Clutch guy doesn't like things that have any whiff of brimstone and Satan about them. And I find that that's what resonates most with me. There's a whiff of brimstone about Little Richard and that kind of thing. I don't want the, how can we say, the more down-to-earth version. Anyway, whatever. What am I talking about? I once sat in a French bar recently and watched a kind of Euro electro pop DJ set unfold. And it was kind of cool for a while, but after 2 hours I simply wanted to hear something with some muscle, some bass rumbling. 3 minutes of Iron Fist would wash all of this musical fluff down the drain in 3 seconds. And this is kind of how I feel in a nutshell about some of these things. I'm always looking for the extremity of the emotional range. I want art inspired by darkness, anger, hate, aggression, adversity, rage, proper melancholy, tragedy, sadness, whatever you want to call it. And that should be unashamedly I think the well from which art draws from. But of course, something like power pop, this is not really what it's about. It's about really, I suppose, the awkwardness of human interactions. It's about, failed love affairs, teenage heartbreak, all that kind of thing, But let's continue in this vein. A quirky song was playing in a bar I was in the other day called Toshimi Battles the Pink Robots And it just makes me, how can we say, makes me feel embarrassed for my grey matter. Pointlessness. Of course, I do understand the concept that not everything has to be, kind of like tipped into the red on every sort of measure of our emotional range. And some things are just frivolous and some things are just kind of fun. And, I, again, subscribe to Justin Hawkins of The Darkness, his YouTube channel, which I think is great. And he's sort of made me, he's kind of taught a little bit of tolerance for these kind of things. I've forgotten who the band was or who even sings that song. Maybe I don't know. But remember feeling nothing but disgust at the video when I inadvertently had to sit through it in the same hipster bar. For example, the Foo Fighters are always associated for me with that video where they dress up as cabin crew on a plane. Too cute. I don't care about Blur. For example, Blur have that song. That's the little milk carton that goes around. These things, they're just indelibly marked into my brain as like, oh, you're the band with the little cute milk carton. I will never ever listen to anything that you do. I don't care that Graham Coxon made a death metal band. In fact, shame on you for mixing the streams or whatever the Ghostbusters rule is. Death metal ain't for you, Mr. Coxon. I'm sorry. Anyway, what am I talking about? Like I said, I'm just trying to stir the pot a little bit. But anyway, I got stuck watching a YouTube video of a band called Oingo Boingo live. The first song was interesting, but who calls their band that? No atom of my 12-year-old or my 46-year-old self could live with myself for listening to a band with such a stupid name. It's fine. I think I'm close-minded. I've made my point. I'll put the needle down what have we got right now? I can see death, spiritual healing. No problem. But what can we say? We can part ways. We can part ways now with some of these kind of things. Or you can keep your Teenage Fan Club albums and I'll have Pornography by The Cure. You can keep your Elton John records and I'll take Leonard Cohen. You can keep your Frank Zappa, but I'll have Nick Cave. It's no problem. Art and entertainment, right? However, Just Can't Get Enough by Depeche Mode is sort of a novelty record on some level, right? But it paves the way for the brilliance of Ultra. It's more the exuberance of youth than inviting people to take part in an in-joke. This monkey's gone to heaven. Well, I'll have Cemetery Gates by the Smiths instead. Ah, the Smiths. Well, now. Joy, no doubt, can be channeled through the righteous energy of rock and roll. I have generally, like I said, nothing but contempt for the opposite. But so, of course, Sparks. Sparks! I filed in my head, not filled in my head, although that's also quite possible. I had filed in my head under novelty. But my cousin is on the front foot. Manowar, he says. Well, that's funny, right? And objectively, he's not wrong, I guess. It's not intentional. Although to someone outside the bubble of metal, it seems so. Hilarious and over the top. The full Spinal Tap, this one goes to 11. But from within, it's not. And I said, and we'll use the word again, draped on novelty or quirky sounding, I suppose it's self-knowing. The sort of wink, the self-knowing wink from one person who understands the nuances of power pop to another is what is missing for me in the visual confrontation we're discussing here. Sure, it's total heavy metal. And loincloths, greased nipples, before we get to stuffed eagles and furry boots. But to him it's funny. I can see the point. But I think it's amusing in different ways. And it's really about intent, right? Or is it? The intention of Manowar is not humour, even if it can be seen as humorous. He pokes fun at me and the Big M. And you know what? Right. I get it. We're old adversaries when it comes to arguing and fighting with each other. He's on the front foot, I'm on the front foot. The start of this podcast is kind of a reaction to him being on the front foot, which I wouldn't take entirely seriously. But, damn it, I put that Sparks biography on Netflix. Oh, it's a Netflix. And look, I knew this town ain't big enough for the both of us, of course. But as the movie unfolded, I realised I knew more and more and more songs. And that slow dawning of realisation, damn, this is fascinating. In fact, more than fascinating. My prejudices are becoming completely unmoored. And halfway through, I follow them on Spotify to re-examine the songs after watching. And I ain't too proud or close-minded to admit, over the course of the next 90 minutes, I simply sort of fell in, well, we won't call it in love, but I fell in like with their idealism. They won me over. This commitment to actually being artists, working every day, this incredible narrative between the male brothers, M-A-E-L. Of course, We all know their curious aesthetic, as John Lennon said in Mythology. Mark Bolan singing with Hitler on keyboards. You all know their aesthetic. It's kind of iconic. Well, more than iconic. And actually, as the movie went on, the documentary went on, I started to root for them. Something deep and primal took over. Rooting for the underdog. Rooting for the outsider. Just like it did with the Anvil movie. Okay, sure, metalheads know that the reason why Anvil never made it is kind of, they suck. They kind of sort of do. But you rooted for them. And that last reveal in Japan as they come out to a big crowd, let's be frank, your heart kind of soared for them. Even mine did a little. I'm an automaton like myself, but I'm not a robot after all. And well, guess the fuck what? Watching the last 25% of that Sparks documentary as they get what they deserve and a new audience who finally respect them and they get their moment, which starts the dial moving in the late 90s but blossoms in the noughties, is, let's be straight, kind of inspiring. And as the credits rolled, I had a bit of a grin. Damn it. Did that actually make me happy? Maybe. I'm beginning to discover a little bit of conceit in my own thoughts here. Actually, the documentary is a beautiful example of artists never conceding to the mainstream, never towing the party line, doing their own thing, and challenging prejudices, and even managing in 90 minutes to dismantle one as profoundly carved into stone as mine is. I mean, I say that, but the truth is, I have very straight views on things, but if you put on Maggot Brain, Pale Moon, Exile on Main Street, or drop some Joni Mitchell, Lydia Lunch, or Patti Smith even, I mean, hey, you will find Beastie Boys albums in my collections, but when all is said and done, I prefer Mental Funeral. Okay, but you know what? I do now follow Sparks on Spotify. And damn it to my cousin if he wasn't kind of right. But then I went back to Spotify and tried to listen to Sparks without the visuals, which was a daunting prospect as they have about 50 albums. Where do you even start on a band with 50 years of history? Incidentally, they have a song called Lighten Up, Morrissey. Oh, I'll get to that. Over 20 minutes of trying to break their back catalogue and walking around town listening to Dio. Go figure. That neat little segue leads me into a kind of older version of the same story. It's 1988. In fact, it might even be 1989. And a group of, let's call them summer friends, a sort of cool punk rock, metal, goth, straight edge breakfast club, have a sort of vinyl listening group. It doesn't last long, just a couple of weeks in the summer, and maybe of 89 actually. Let's say it's 1989. 4 dudes and 1 girl, and we all fancy the girl. Awkward outsider kids back when that's what it actually meant. My mate with an X on his hand, straight edge guy in a Minor Threat shirt. My other mate with a Bowie shirt, a surfer dude who liked sort of like late 60s, early 70s garage, and the archetypal Susie Sue goth girl from 89, and me with my Slayer shirt on. And we played each other the vinyls we got that week. Now, you've heard me before talk about this. My straight edge mate was talking up Black Flag. This is the most aggressive thing ever. And I had Sodom in the Sign of Evil in my bag waiting to go, which objectively makes mincemeat out of Black Flag, sonically at least. I stand over that statement, Black Flag. TV Party Tonight doesn't hold a candle in terms of caustic and violent sounding grooves compared to Blasphemer. But of course, in the fullness of time, I end up with a deep respect for Black Flag and Rollins and what they achieved. But today we're listening to the Smiths. It's 1989 and I hate it. I mean, fuck me, I hate it. It goes completely over my head. Absolutely, completely. It sounds like pure musical whimsy to me, and I file it under music with no balls. And we'll return to this concept that Morrissey had no balls, because he certainly has balls right now. But somewhere about 15 years later, my oldest mate is playing the best of the Smiths in his car. We're driving to a football match. I still don't get it. He plays me this new band called the White Stripes, Hotel Yorba, blah, 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 blah. I think, notinterested.com. My prejudices are well and truly intact. However, somewhere around a decade ago, maybe a bit more, I watch Irish Blood, English Heart by Morrissey live in Manchester Arena. Morrissey, and got to admit the lyrics got to me. The tone, the attitude, said something about my family, my history to me. Now, it helped at the time that Morrissey seemed to be single-handedly pissing off all the carping and whinging voices on the woke left, which we find shrill and annoying. Good job, sir. And slowly but surely, I uncovered a deep sort of love for the Smiths that I suppose started with that Morrissey track and then sort of led me down a path. And the joy of discovering this band that I'd previously ignored and filed under to whimsy, now that I love them. In fact, how my friend laughed at me who played me them in 1989. But I would go so far as to say they are now one of my favourite bands, unreservedly. I got it. The penny dropped. And what's more, it makes sense, this sense of melancholy. Everyday melancholy. But also as a fan of Leonard Cohen and Nick Cave, how could I not respect what is stylistically one of the greatest lyricists of all time? How could I? And it was the opening chords of What Difference Does It Make? I told my oldest mate, yeah man, I kind of love the Smiths now. He flung his head back like a cartoon, like a sort of, 1950s Hanna-Barbera cartoon, and laughed. I mean, bellowed laughing. Fucking hell. 30 years later, well, better late than never, I guess. And I'll digress for a moment to talk about Morrissey, because the more that I've become sort of drawn into his orbit, the more I find the whole thing fascinating. Because let's be honest, Morrissey right now is more black metal than most black metal bands. His new album is recorded. It's called Bonfire of Teenagers, and his label BMG won't release it. In fact, they've decided to pull all represses and reissues of his old album. They released a sort of pro-diversity statement, and a kind of, the intention, I suppose, the backstory of that was a sort of anti-Morrissey sort of statement. And I may not agree with everything Morrissey says, but I think that people have forgotten that traditionally, rock and roll was about rebellion. It was about sticking it to the man. It was about standing up for the outsider status. It was actually about standing up for your opinions, not always to cater to everyone or even the major group demographic of people, the major group think. And Morrissey transgresses this incredibly. Now, you will have heard me talk throughout the last 2 years, actually, if you've been following me, about how certain unnamed members of the heavy metal community just seem to be carrying water for Big Pharma, shilling for the government, shilling for the state. Shilling is maybe a strong word, but most definitely the songs they sang about rebellion seem to echo a bit hollow with me, as they clearly came down on the side of state and governance, and let's call him surreptitiously the man. Well, I'll tell you what, Morrissey is still on the other side of that divide. Now, I may not agree with everything that he says. I think it's a ridiculous concept that you should believe in, or you should agree with anything necessarily that you're, the artist that you like say. Some yes, some no. But I do admire the fact that he holds his ground. And incredibly, I also came across a Simpsons episode, which is a complete hatchet job on Morrissey, voiced by Benedict Cumberbatch, no less. Just to point out that Benedict Cumberbatch seemed to take money to act as Julian Assange in a movie which seemed to be a kind of propaganda exercise, a sort of anti-Assange exercise. I don't really have an opinion one way or the other about Julian Assange, but there's something contradictory on those terms there. But certainly somebody in the writing team of The Simpsons went out to just go for Morrissey. But the first single on this new album is basically a sort of an answer to the Manchester terror attack, in which a guy killed, I think, 21 young girls at an Ariana Grande concert. And he basically says, while you sang Don't Look Back in Anger, he claims that he will always look back in anger. And there's something that resonated with me, because in those summer where there was lots of attacks, especially what happened in Paris and that kind of thing, in the at the Eagles of Death Metal show, all those kind of things, the sight of people coming out onto the street the next day to sing Imagine by John Lennon just filled me with a kind of existential rage. It's like, where's the reaction to to like 81 people being ploughed into by a truck in, I think it was in either Lyon, Nantes or Bordeaux, or we saw the whole world explode over during the lockdown in the summer over protests over George Floyd. But I've often kind of wondered, where was the anger over these other things that happened? For example, I suppose this is just the modern, the society that we live in now, where people very clearly their anger or rage is compartmentalized as in relationship to how it will reflect on their stance with their friends or on social media, that kind of thing. But there's certainly no consistency to the arguments. Anyway, what am I talking about? Yeah, God damn it, Morrissey is black metal as he's going in the lyrics in this song. And, he is... He is, it would seem to me, the same character he always was from the 80s. And, you know, that was the role that rock stars or people like that had in the 70s and the 60s and the 80s. They stood up against the establishment. Now, you probably go, well, you just pick and choose because you seem to like some of his politics. I didn't say that. I'll give out about Neil Young for being what it seemed to be his ill-advised Spotify tirade, and also the fact that he said he was going to pull music that he actually doesn't even own, that some of it had been sold to the venture capitalist firm BlackRock. So I don't think he had any real integrity to begin with within that argument. But it would seem to me that nowadays people want their rock stars to be conformist. They don't want them to rage against the machine anymore. They want to stand up for the virtues of the machine. But to me, at least, as somebody who came late to the party, I'm like, oh, wow, great. Good for you, Morrissey. You seem to be able to piss off this many people. Well, surely it's good to have somebody, ruffling the feathers of the mainstream. I certainly don't demand to agree with every one of his points of view or principles, but isn't it fascinating that in an age where so much of what passes for modern popular music just seems to be so anodyne or overtly sexual, which nobody seems to really object to, as in the sort of sexualization of preteens and pre-adolescents, but, that society seems to think that that's okay. But the idea that we just get tons of articles now put in Morrissey, you just get tons of cancel culture articles of people wanting, kind of like, we've had enough of you now. We liked you when there was a light that, never goes out, was used in all these 90s and noughties kind of like teen movies. We liked that, but we don't like you making statements about, well, those same pre-teenage girls dying in a terror attack. So what happened to all the so-called anti-establishment people or the so-called rebels? I know, strange. Anyway, sorry, I got kind of sidetracked there. But something really provoked and poked a nerve with me with this Simpsons episode. And I just thought, wow, is this really the Simpsons' place to just kind of go right for the jugular? Somebody in the writing room going, today we're writing an episode to get that fucking Morrissey bloke. So anyway, yeah, Morrissey is black metal. That's all I was merely meant to say with that last comment. It's at this moment, I suppose I should mention another ad, and that is, again, the Irish band Strangers with Guns. The links will be underneath the description and on the YouTube channel. They have a new EP out, which, to me at least, echoes some early 90s therapy. It's sort of aggressive, it's a bit hardcore, it's a bit sort of grungy, it's a bit dirgy. You'll hear it playing in the background if you want to go and support a young Irish artist, and even just check them out. Follow the links. I suppose what I'm trying to say with that little Morrissey tirade is that I came late to the party and found it great that somebody, like I said, I don't have to agree with all of their principles or their politics. To think that you can do that with anyone, I think is just a nonsense. Or to demand that they toe the line, again, is just somehow ridiculous, but that's the age that we live in, the kind of cancel culture age. And so, especially the new controversy around his new single, around his new album, it just struck me that here was somebody who is still the outsider, still the rebel. As he says, how can you cancel somebody who always was cancelled? Well, anyway, I do wonder how many people have been busy getting their Smiths lyrics that they got tattooed back in the 80s and 90s lasered off. I would love to see a statistic about that. Anyway. Prejudices, musical prejudices. The third form of denial, it kind of comes when you're too busy or sort of arguing with a person, an individual, in this case an ex, who kept on at me about Mark Lanigan. You have to try it. Someone had given me a Screaming Trees CD in the 90s, and I'm not sure it ever got played. Under a Funeral Moon or some grunge band with flannel shirts. There was no competition, right? Anyway, said X pushed the Lanigan angle again and again and again, and I wasn't listening. Well, it was a bit of a turbulent moment, so of course time spent arguing consolidated my unwillingness and shoulder-shrugging assholeness that was unable to take on board Mark Lanigan. And for the third time, as this is a biblical podcast, right, how wrong could I be? Funeral Blues was perhaps my most played album of 2 or 3 months ago, when I cracked it, and when I had the idea for this podcast as well, actually. Sadly, after he died, I played it over and over. In fact, almost like an album I got in 1989, 10 or 15 times in 1 week. How could I have been quite so wrong? Of course, sometimes when an artist is so prolific, it puts me off, as you wonder, is there an expression of content over creativity? But then, just like sparks, you realised that real artists, they create. Maybe you've watched that Nick Cave documentary. I think it's called 300 Days or something, where he goes on about his writing day. You wake up and you create. You go to the space and create. Well, there's no doubt that Mark Lanegan did the same thing. And once I cracked that album, I watched him live, regretting the fact that he played literally 250 meters from my house several times. And no doubt I was sitting downing beers listening to the first Bathory album. A noble pursuit, no doubt, that is, but you can indeed do both. So, what is the real purpose? Porpoise. Yeah, what is the porpoise? What is the purpose of this podcast? Apart from my kind of mid ramble across Morrissey and how black metal he is now, I suppose the thing is that orthodoxy is fine. And that I admire people who know what they like and know what they dislike and stick to their guns, but it ain't an exact science. And admitting that sometimes you got it wrong can take 30 years. So my advice, watch the Sparks documentary, listen to Meet His Murder or Funeral Blues, or maybe take down from the shelf something you filed under I'm not bothered and give it another chance, because it can be an incredibly rewarding and enriching experience to discover an artist and go, wow, now I have like, however, this great discography lined up to discover over 10 or 20 years. And of course, you know, when I could be forgiven at 14 for not really understanding the Smiths, because all I wanted to hear, as I said, was Sodom and Morbid Angel and Bathory and Slayer. Aggressive stuff that a 14-year-old boy raging with testosterone would want to hear. I wasn't really interested in sort of bedsit, introverted sort of melancholy. That really didn't appeal to me. Although it must be said that at the time The Cure struck a broader nerve with me, but that's maybe because Pornography, the album that got played to me, had a sort of open, broader, heavy drum sound that sort of you could hear resonated with a more metal teenage mindset. And the same with Joy Division. The sort of prominent bass lines were much easier to tap into. You could feel that link much more easily to some elements of metal or punk, you know, whereas the Smiths was something really, really quite different. It was a hard nut to crack, and like I said, it took me 30 years, and I can still picture one of my oldest friends' face when I told him after 30 years that I loved the Smiths. He was just like, wow, incredible, you are such an asshole. He had a point. My friends, episode 120 of Agitators Anonymous is just about sort of the three biblical prongs of musical prejudice. What an asshole I am, and how I recently resonated deeply with somebody else who's widely considered an asshole as well, and that man's name is a young Morrissey. And so, to the end of Agitators Anonymous, don't take me that seriously, my friends. I'm Alan Averill, and this is episode 120. Over and out.